Hello, my name is Maddie Osman, and I'm the founder of the Blogsmith, which is a content creation agency for B2B technology brands. So, when we first came to Process Street, we were in search of a tool that could handle the flexible workflow that we wanted to build. We tried to build it out on different project management tools and found them lacking in terms of the things that we specifically needed. Some of the issues were things like too many notifications for things that were actually unrelated to the person assigned to the task as a whole. And it was also things like they might have offered custom fields, but that was really the extent of customizing the workflow. And I just find in general that many project management tools, they're good for certain things, but ultimately you have to fit the box of what the creators intended for them. And so that's what I really like about Process Street. It is completely customizable. It's no code, so you don't necessarily have to mess around in the back end to get something that looks like what you want, what's going to serve your purposes. And this is actually coming from someone who was a web developer back in the day. I love coding, but I love things that are easy to make work. So yeah, Process Street has really solved a lot of our processes, a lot of our problems around processes. And this one that I'm showing you today is probably my favorite. It is certainly the one that I've spent the most time developing. If you look here, you can see how different members of our team interact with it. So the first steps are all about assigning the project, communicating with clients when we kick things off and things like that, working with a client to approve topics, whether we're pitching them or whether they are giving them to us. Some extra levels of service we provide for certain content, like interviewing experts to include their insights in content, potentially working with their sales team to get a demo for a certain product we have to write about, or even like interviewing a CEO about their opinions so that we can accurately represent them in a thought piece. Then we have this keyword research step, so our SEOs come in and do all of these different things. When we were doing keyword research for a client, we don't do that for every single piece of content we create. For example, like an ebook, we might do it for a landing page for the ebook, but the ebook itself is not going to get indexed if it's behind a paywall or if somebody has to give their email for it. We have this outlining step, which is what the writer completes and the editor approves to make sure that we're all on the same page and that the keyword research was used correctly. Then there's the drafting step. This is where the editors come in to make sure that everything is accurately representing the brand and that it follows the Blogsmith style. And then after we get through edits internally, we turn the project over to the client and they can see if they have any edits, then we will address those internally as well. And then finally, if the client needs it, we can upload content to their content management system. Not every client takes us up on this, but it is a nice option to have. I'll show you how we can add that or take it away within our workflow so that it's not assigned if a client doesn't need it. And then also, if we are doing any sort of promotions for the client, some of these steps are optional. And then there's some tracking that we do as well that will appear on every workflow run that we do. So what I want to start with is this client project roadmap that was created with the help of Process Streets and Perry. So shout out to you, Anne. It would have taken me forever to figure this out without your help. And so what this does is, in addition to, we send these weekly Friday email updates to clients to basically say, this is what we worked on last week, here's what we're planning to work on next week if you have any adjustments, and then here's anything that we're stuck on that we need approval for or clarification on. So in between those emails, clients are probably still wondering, what's the state of my project? And that's what this helps us to communicate. So it has sort of like the high level details, just like, when do we consider it due to the client so that they can see that, we're all on the same page about that. What's the word count? What did it end up at after we wrote it and after any client edits? A link to the article so I can actually show you. This is one we did for the Blogsmith. We didn't fill out all the details because not all of them are necessary if it's not a client-facing piece. But you can kind of see like this was the final document, so the client can use the link to what it is a share link, so you would turn it on, and then you can share that with the client, and then they don't even necessarily need a Process Street account to be able to access this. And then what happens is, because of permissions, the rest of the workflow is completely hidden from them, so this is all that they see. So sometimes clients like to see like what keywords we went after, so we'll include that here just as one of the high level details. And then this part's really cool because as each person completes their step, like the notably large steps after production starts, they can see the progress of that. And so that's like the main purpose for this. And then we just added these other details because those are things that clients care about, and it's nice to see summarized in case for some reason we're not on the same page. It gives them something to talk to us about. And then this section down here is for like the more optional steps that not every client's going to want or get. And so like the CMS upload or SEO keyword research, it just depends on the piece. Again, like an ebook, we wouldn't do SEO keyword research for. So this whole section is based on conditional logic. It will only appear if we are doing those things for the client, so that it doesn't confuse them. If we're not doing those things, then they see that. And that's the beauty of Process Street, is that we have the ability to do that. So that's one of my favorite uses of Process Street, but obviously there's a lot more to this checklist. So let's dig into a couple other things. One of the things that's worth mentioning is how we can customize through conditional logic the workflow for different clients. And so there's actually a step in our... This is the step where we like assign everything out and we add all the details, and then we have details available at a high level for people's reference. Anybody who's working on the task, they would look here first, and the project manager is actually the first person to touch this. And so they would select if it is a certain client, and then that activates custom parts of the workflow. And so you can see it's kind of explained here, like this is why you're doing that, because we also add it here as another reference point. And probably I could do Zapier or something to customize this to pick up off of that, but it's not that sophisticated yet. So anyway, let's say that, you know, for example, we picked Bluehost. So on this task, this client project management task, we have some custom workflow pieces here about like how we would label those articles within Google Docs, you know, like where we would put them, who we have to share it with, and things like that. So this is really important because that is a benefit to our clients that we provide. We don't charge extra for working with whatever project management tool they use, and every client has a different one, so we have a different workflow for each one. But that's something so that we can keep moving projects forward without things getting lost in email or just paused for whatever reason. And so, you know, depending on the client, this task would be different. For example, you can see like hourly would have a different workflow than Bluehost, for example. And there is a lot of detail and it's all important. So that's why we need to have it here. But we don't necessarily need to show all the workflows for every client on every workflow run that we do, because that would be overwhelming and it would be too much information. It would be a lot to scroll through. So that's one way we use it. Another thing, this is something that we did for a client that was kind of a legacy client on our social media management services. We really don't do that anymore, so we wouldn't necessarily use this task anymore. But because we already have the writer working on relevant blog content for them, and you know, we have to share it out on social, it just seemed natural to have a step here for suggesting social copy that makes the person who did the social media creations job a little bit easier. So that's one way that you could use it, just customizing the end deliverable for the client, or to really support how you're working with them in other aspects of the business. And then another thing, and I think we have this for most, if not all clients, is this step, which shows up on every workflow, but is customized according to the specific client, so that they can easily access a relevant style guide or any sort of details like a template we need to follow and things like that, so that the writer and the editor don't have to dig for this, right? It's right here. Eventually, we're going to use the Process Street Pages product to integrate this information. We're actually going through a project right now where we're revamping this entire workflow. So that'll be part of it, just to centralize all the information. So let's see what's next here. This is another way that we customize the workflow for different clients, not necessarily by client, but by like the level of service that we're providing. So again, we don't do keyword research for everybody, but we obviously wouldn't want to assign it if we're not doing it. So if you say no, then all of the steps under SEO keyword research go away. It's the same thing with the CMS upload step. So if we go down a little bit, like all these steps would go away if we're not doing that. And then we have this content promotion add-on. So again, if we're not doing that for the client, if that's not something that's within our scope, then it doesn't show those steps. And then all the people assigned to this checklist don't get random tasks that really have nothing to do with what we expect of them. So just another way that you can use conditional logic and adjust your workflow according to really like what you need to get the client compared to what's everything you could possibly do, right? All like 128 steps. I don't think any workflow has ever been 128 steps. That would be a beast. Another thing I wanted to show was how we're using automations built into Process Street. We do have a couple things set up with Zapier for certain workflows. I don't think we have anything set up with Zapier for this particular workflow, but we do use the built-in automations. For example, you can see here like that Google Sheet, and you can see a couple other things here. So a couple things I wanted to show you. First of all, whenever we're editing something, we have our editors go through and kind of grade the writer on this rubric of different things that we consider to be important, as well as anytime they didn't follow our style guide. And so this helps us to track writers over time to make sure like a new writer is getting up to speed with how we do things, or honestly to see if like maybe that writer is not a good fit for us and we have to keep doing all this work to adjust their content to be high quality enough to confidently deliver it to a client. So obviously a lot of stuff happens during edits. We don't expect writers to be perfect, but this automation takes this information from the relevant task and Process Street when the editor is going through edits, and it just gives us something to work with. And being able to transfer it to a Google Sheet makes it easier to act on, because otherwise you'd have to go into the individual workflow to grab these details. So anything that you can think of that would be better served in something that would be easy to search like this, that's something that I would recommend, because we also do it for this other sheet that we have, which is like, what ideas are you prompted with when you're working on a certain piece? Because those could be topics that we can pitch the client. And, a lot of times when writers are working through this, they come up with ideas for things that we could link to internally, for example, like an internal resource that doesn't exist. So this is a great way for us to help clients build out their content and to get those ideas in the moment so that we're not doing double work. So what else do we have here? This is kind of a fun thing, and it's using variables from different steps to fill in. So this is something that everybody has access to on the main step, but right now we're looking at it on the outline step, and it's essentially the keyword research summarized. So we looked at it before, the keyword research step. I mean, there's like a million steps here, right? And a writer's not going to want to go in and have to look at each step to get those details. And so I figured they're probably not going to use the keyword research unless it's presented to them in a really approachable format. And so, for example, here is just what it looks like from a template view. We have some videos and we have this comprehensive resource about like how to use keywords, but this is where we actually list out what we want the writer to use. So let me show you what that looks like with like a filled out version of this. So again, we have like what we had in the client project tracker, links to the keywords that we're optimizing for. We have data about the intent of the keywords we chose, as well as questions we need to answer for the article to perform well and, reach that end reader that we're interested in reaching. We also have a section here for any terms to try to include. They're not like the most important keywords, but they should help to structure the topic just by kind of looking at them and trying to fit them in. And then we also have some references to Google data that also answers a lot of these same questions, but just to sort of reiterate why we're doing this. And we'll also give some suggestions for like the metadata to use and even competitor information. Featured snippets are just another type of keyword, but they're a little bit more nuanced. So we give a lot of data for how to go about trying to steal the featured snippet, essentially. And then if there are any keywords that didn't get used, this is actually something I think the writer would input later on. So, but it reflects across all steps because we have this on the outline task. We actually also have it repeated on the draft task, and then we have it on that first task that the project manager fills out. And this is just so that, again, everybody has easy access to these details. The editors can see it. We can all be on the same page about what needs to be done. And kind of like what I was saying with the custom client parts of the workflow, like the style guide, really the benefit of having this here and not having the writer have to go into those keyword research steps. And this is, again, where things like permissions really help, because I don't necessarily want to show parts of the workflow that somebody isn't involved with, because I don't want them to be overwhelmed and I don't want them to get notifications about that task and things like that. But having this here just makes it really easy to reference because they're working on the outline, so they need to see this stuff. They shouldn't have to jump around the checklist to figure it all out. So anyway, moving forward, another feature that we use is approvals, and sometimes we'll do that in tandem with like a checklist step. So for example, this step right here is using a couple things. It's using variables because it'll pull in the assignment brief. So this is for the editor, actually. The editor will go through and like look at the outline. They'll compare it with the word count, make sure that it has enough detail that it's going to get there. Compare it against the brief to make sure that it's actually covering all the stuff it needs to cover. And so we have some prompts here for the editor to make sure that the content is what it needs to be before the writer goes to draft, because a lot of waste happens if we don't have this step and we're not on the same page. So we'll use that, and then we have an approval step here. So it'll just go back to the writer's steps, and then they can reject if the writer needs to make any differences. But it's used in tandem with this specific checklist just to make sure that we're not missing anything. I mean, that's the whole point of checklists. It's to make sure that we are covering everything that needs to be covered. And so that's, again, another great thing about Process Street is we don't have to think too hard to be able to get through this step. So then another thing to talk about is we also use the send email feature, and it fills in, again, it's using variables. Those variables are super important, and as long as the project manager is entering things correctly in these initial steps, this review before starting your task, then it simplifies the process everywhere, because then whoever, I think this is an account manager step, so whoever's in charge of this doesn't really have to think hard to be able to get things to clients in a timely manner. And not only that, we also have a step here. I don't think this is it. This is just another example, like where we're showing that workflow run, the project tracker. So we have an email for that as well. But I think there's another step I wanted to show you. Again, this is using conditional logic, and this is based on that review before starting your task step, where we specify how many clients we're actually communicating with, because sometimes it's one person, but sometimes it's up to 4 people. And so using conditional logic, what shows on a certain workflow for different email sends is based on how many contacts there are, and adjusting the language, to say, for example, if this is just one client, hey client, here's your contact, or here's your content, or hey clients, here's this. So that's another thing. It's like a little thing, but it saves so much time over the long term because we're not having to like do this ourselves within Gmail. We can just hit test send and it generates all these things. So we're getting to the end here, I promise. This step is something to show. I'm trying to remember what I wanted to show here. This is an important step in our workflow just because it's sending the content to the client and doing sort of that last check. You can see another quality approval checklist or quality control. Maybe it was just to show these, again, like how it adjusts for different client contacts. So yeah, I won't belabor the point here. That was just another example. I think another thing that I really like about Process Street is it allows me to sort of systemize the thought process for how I want a certain task done. Like the keyword research, this is actually something that took me a long time to think about how to communicate it in a scalable way. And so each of these steps has like a how-to video and an explanation for why we want it this way and like what tools you need to use, and also just like very pointed questions about what I'm looking for. And so all of these things that you see here influence what I showed you with the variables, pulling in all the keyword research information for the writer, editor, and whoever works on it. So that's another thing that it's not like a specific feature of Process Street, but it's something that really helps us because it makes it so that I don't have to necessarily work with the SEOs every day to be like, well, did you think about it this way? Or, that doesn't make sense because of this. It's all in the checklist already. So it's made onboarding new SEOs so much easier. And so, yeah, it's just a huge benefit. And then I think the last thing I wanted to show is just how we use different types of media to make sense of things. So like, here's a GIF of how we want the writer to share their document with us so that we can actually edit it and so we have access to it. That's something that has been a problem in the past. And so just even having a step to be like, hey, so did you actually do what the GIF is asking you to do? That's really useful to just have the visual. And then another example is having videos. For example, how do we use the time tracking tool that we use in Slack? And not everyone is paid hourly. Like some of the writers are paid by word, and so this is probably a little bit onerous to them, but it helps us to do resource planning and to understand profitability on projects, to be able to track the time associated with any given project. And so yeah, this video just shows them how to do it, but that's like the greater purpose of why. And then the last thing is showing like step-by-step guides. So this is how we add keywords that we're optimizing for to our rank tracking tool. And, the great thing is that one of my SEOs put this together. So as we develop processes at the Blogsmith, more people in the team are getting involved in it. Like a lot of this checklist is something that I made, but this part isn't. This is something that the SEO created, and that's the beautiful thing about having an organization that is process driven, is that other people get involved in that, and then it's not all on you if you can just sort of lead by example. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are just some features of our workflow. Every single step has its complications and details, but it's all those details and complications that make it so that we're all on the same page. There's no question about what I'm looking for, and we can serve our clients consistently with really high quality content, and we can catch a majority of any problems there might be before they become an issue. So I love Process Street. I love workflows. I love process, and I'm just excited to see what more I can do with this tool as I learn more about it.